This is Greg Olson, inviting you to check out my new Blue Wire podcast, TE1, where I interview tight ends throughout the history of the NFL who have helped revolutionize the position. TE1 is presented by the Chevy Silverado. The Silverado is all about grit. It's strong and dependable, exactly like playing tight end. Just like the incredible players we sit down with on the podcast, the Chevy Silverado is in a league of its own. Strong, advanced, and dependable. Download TE1 today, wherever you listen to podcasts.
What is crack-whacking Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale coming at you once more without my co-host Adam Frommel. Do have another backloaded pod for you today. We're going to be bringing in Bryan Toporek to talk about the Philadelphia 76ers. He is a Bleacher Report quality editor, co-host of the NBA pod, and also writes for Forbes Sports and Fansided. Follow him on Twitter at btoporek. That's at btoporek. But before we talk to him, just our usual few housekeeping notes. We're also going to talk some NBA Finals and then some Buddy Hield trade rumor-ish thingy-majiggies, whatever. I don't really know what to call them. Please, though, as always, remember to subscribe to this podcast and download every episode wherever you are consuming your podcast. Whether or not you're using iTunes, we beg with you, just head over to iTunes, search us, Hardwood Knocks, throw us a 5-star rating, write a review. That helps us out a ton as well. And you can follow us on social media. That also helps us out a ton as well, at Hardwood Knocks on Twitter. And then also our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com, search Hardwood Knocks. We are bound to come up. Subscribe, like our videos. That would be appreciated too. Last but certainly not least, shout out to our sponsors who make this podcast possible this week, DoorDash and BetOnline. You'll be hearing from them in just a few moments. Let's talk some finals, though, before we get into the Sixers, who there's some Sixers to talk. Let's just say that. So the Lakers dropped Game 3, 115 to 104. There's a lot to talk about when looking at how poorly the Lakers handled this game, but I think this game needs to begin and end with Jimmy Butler going full supernova. And that was the difference. He had a really good game too, but in Game 3, he scored 40 points, dropped 11 rebounds, dropped 13 assists, played almost 45 minutes, went 14 of 20 from the floor, 2 steals, 2 blocks, did have 5 turnovers, but he was just an absolute monster. And look, it was an historical performance. He is just the third player in NBA Finals history per StatHead to have a 40-point triple-double. The other two, Jerry West in 1969 and LeBron James in 2015. That's not bad company to be in. And also, this is per Mark J. Spears of The Undefeated, Jimmy Butler is the first player to outscore, out-rebound, and out-assist LeBron James in a finals game. And that includes LeBron's teammates. That is a wild stat to me, too. And then you look at just what he meant to Miami's offense, even when he wasn't the one taking the shots. He put a lot of pressure on the center of the Lakers defense, which also just wasn't that great. It felt like Anthony Davis at points was showing too much respect to Kelly Olynyk. I don't care really how good he's been in this series. Anyway, though, 18 of Miami's 34 3-point field goal attempts in Game 3 were directly off passes from Jimmy Butler, and that's per Daryl Blackport, on Twitter. So this game, what it means moving forward, the Heat, I still wouldn't expect them to win this series, and I just think that's fair because both Bam Adebayo and Goran Dragic didn't play in Game 3. You can kind of look at this victory as if you're going to get some of them back, that should make this a series, and it technically can. I'm far more hopeful that Bam Adebayo comes back than Dragic, and even if Dragic does come back, I wouldn't expect him to be that effective. If neither of them comes back, or if you get Bam Adebayo back and he's just super limited, this game was a lot of Jimmy Butler. There were some big moments from Tyler Hero, #Stinkface. They got another good game from Kelly Olynyk, but this was just a lot of Jimmy Butler playing at an intergalactic level is the best way that I would call it. And that's not necessarily sustainable. But I think, the other thing that was bizarre to me in this, and I don't like boiling games down to just a lack of focus or whatever you want to call, absence of a certain effort, not effort in general, but a certain effort. But the Lakers finished +6 from 3-point range over Miami. They once again won the offensive rebounding battle 11-3. And they were about dead even in free throws. They made 22 of 29 attempts. The Heat made 21 of 23 attempts. And so the Lakers left some points on the board when it came to free throws. And look, they were in this game despite they had 10 first quarter turnovers. That's something that you could absolutely point to as an issue. LeBron himself had 8 turnovers in the game. This was probably one of his, yes, he dropped 25, 10, and 8, but this was probably one of his worst playoff games that we've seen. So it's weird almost when you look at those numbers, like unless you're mega concerned that the Lakers were, I don't even know how you could be concerned. They were a +1 at the free throw line. Unless you expect them to win that battle by more, and that's how they're going to win games. This felt like a puzzling outcome almost, and almost just a victory of sheer will from Jimmy Butler. And because on most nights, if you say the Lakers won the offensive rebounding battle, the free throw battle, and the 3-point battle, like you would assume that that's a victory. And the fact that it wasn't, it speaks definitely to their sloppy play. Anthony Davis got into some foul trouble during the first half, which did not help him. And then he just felt super passive. 9 shot attempts, only 1 shot attempt in the fourth quarter. This is per at Half Court Hoops on Twitter. In the 18 or so possessions that Anthony Davis was in during the fourth, he was only involved in 5 actions, and not a single play was run for him. He had 2 post-ups and then 3 where he set a ball screen, none with LeBron being the ball handler in those situations. Again, that's per Half Court Hoops on Twitter. #wow, that's definitely a problem. I think a lot of people have also pointed to, if LeBron is going to spend so much time on Jimmy Butler, why are you going to so easily switch off of him, like when it's just not necessary? I agree with the overall stance. I don't know that it became like this massive problem until later in the game, where it did feel like the Heat did a good job of targeting, like they knew that the Lakers were going to switch so easily. So they really went after a Danny Green, that knowing if he was going to be on the switch, somebody's just not as strong as Butler. Ditto for KCP. Markieff Morris, even someone who might have that girth, but like Jimmy Butler is going to beat him, particularly if you get him going downhill beforehand. And so the Lakers are getting caught with like their hand in their pants in that situation. Essentially, is what it felt like. And it was weird because you look at the partial possessions that LeBron defended Butler on were 21.9 in Game 3. That's a team leading 21.9. And the Heat only scored 17 points as a team in those situations, which is under 0.78 points per possession, which is good overall. But because he's splitting so much time with other people, like a Markieff Morris, where Butler was 3 of 7 with 2 assists against him. Kyle Kuzma, who had a great game, I think you can argue, might have put up the most resistance against Jimmy Butler on defense at points then. Butler was 1 of 3 with 0 assists against Kyle Kuzma. And again, this tracking data is imperfect, but the ones I'm reading sort of match up with what I was watching during Game 3. When he went up against Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, 2 of 2 with 1 assist. So like those all become problems. And look, even against the Anthony Davis, this is the one that I like. If you're going to switch, like that, you'd rather see Anthony Davis go after Jimmy Butler here. He was 2 of 2 against Anthony Davis with 3 assists. So I think that you need to kind of, if you're going to have LeBron on Butler, you need to do it in the same vein that you did against Denver, where he's just going to stick to Jamal Murray more. And if that's too much to ask, well, then it's time to explore something else. And that's probably where the main issue comes in, is who is the best body aside from LeBron James to throw at Jimmy Butler, let's say full-time or semi-full-time. It's not Marcus Morris, even though it feels like he has the build. I wouldn't trust Kyle Kuzma to do it, even though he was solid defensively in Game 3. Danny Green would probably be your best option, and like there's going to be a strength deficit there, and LeBron just might end up being your best option. So don't soft switch as much, I guess, would be the recommendation. But again, I don't think that was like the biggest deal in this. I understand the logic where if you're going to put LeBron on Butler, don't make it so easy for Butler to be able to get off of him. But something else that, you look at was, even particularly later in the game, like after you're making those switches, the lane is just so open because Anthony Davis didn't feel like he was anywhere near the basket, paying so much respect to Kelly Olynyk. And that's just, look, if Kelly Olynyk's going to have a big game, like Kelly Olynyk have a big game, I would think that you need to put up a lot more resistance at the rim. And yes, look, at the beginning, if he's off the floor, if he's in foul trouble, this is Davis I'm talking about, I totally get it. But later in the game, Like there was a possession where Jimmy Butler dribbled out of the corner after I think the Lakers switched on him twice, and there was just no one around the basket because Anthony Davis was like glued to Kelly Olynyk. And I get the inclination where you don't want Kelly Olynyk to hit a three when it was a relatively tight game at that point. Still, it's Kelly Olynyk, and there should be like more help around the basket in those situations for LA. Something else about the Lakers that was just off. So in the first two games of this series, they were shooting almost 64% in the restricted area and the paint overall. And then in this one, they were just 54.8% on those looks in the paint and the restricted area. That's something that's going to need to come up for them, particularly if they're going to, Anthony Davis wasn't necessarily killing it on the offensive glass himself, but if you're going to commit so much to offensive rebound, or if you're going to be, again, +8 on the offensive glass, you're going to want more of those bunnies to fall. And they were kind of, a lot of them just felt like random offensive rebounds where it's like Rondo catching one and then he's going to dribble it out. Sort of the same thing with like a Kuzma. So I think it's probably more instructive. You look at and you say, all right, well, Anthony Davis and Dwight Howard had 2 offensive rebounds apiece, which really isn't too much. Still, that's just, the number there is just wild to me. Lakers were also, so you win the 3-point battle, but you go 5 of 21 on above the break threes. I wouldn't say that's an unsustainably low number. They did their damage from the corners where they were 9 of 21, that's both of those feel sustainable, where it's like on a LeBron James led team, yeah, you're going to see a lot of made corner 3-pointers. And then when you're looking at their shooters, yeah, there are going to be nights where they're just not going to have it going from above the break. And Danny Green dealing with an injury, we know, but in almost 17 minutes of action, and that's probably why he's not your best option to go up against Butler. 0 of 4 from 3, 0 of 6, and it just becomes, almost untenable to really keep him on the floor. If he's not going to give you, made shots on offense, and then he's becoming, I don't want to say he's a defensive liability, but he might be there. And he becomes a liability in a sense if you can't have him go up against a Jimmy Butler, and then there's no Goran Dragic necessarily to worry about. This is just a punch back from the Heat. Like, it's absolutely massive. And if they get Bam Adebayo back for Game 4, he said that he plans to play every single game since he was injured in Game 1, dealing with a neck issue, I believe, also had some shoulder stuff going on. And I believe his stance is he believes he's going to play in Game 4 as well. If you get him back, the one thing perhaps that helps, even though he's not the greatest rebounder and he's not like this huge, like I don't want to say he's not a rim deterrent, but like you can score at the basket with Bam Adebayo on the floor. That's not really meant to be any disrespect. He's just going to be a better guy when it comes to switching on the outside. But if you get him back, it should, in theory, be able to limit the Lakers' opportunities on the offensive glass. And again, I think maybe you can argue that the Heat did that when you're looking at how their offensive rebounding was dispersed amongst the Lakers. Still, that should help there. And then just having sort of another offensive creator, because the half-court offense, entering this series without Dragic was absolutely terrible. And because they played, their half-court offense was actually fairly efficient in Game 2 without him. And then you have Jimmy Butler going absolutely off in this one. Just a huge performance from him, really putting pressure on the Lakers, getting to the foul line, just doing everything. Didn't take a single 3-pointer, which is objectively amazing. And I think you can argue that Miami can even get better. Tyler Hero, 2 of 7 from 3. Duncan Robinson, 3 of 10 from 3. And some of those were good looks, too, for him. And so I know he's been struggling in the finals, but if a few more of those looks go down, like maybe this isn't even a situation where the Heat have to worry about entering a crunch time, any crunch time minutes. They jump out to that. They led at 14 at one point. That was in the second half. And I think they had I can't remember what the exactly was in the first quarter at one point. Maybe it was 13 or something around there. But with the Lakers having 10 turnovers, and then you end the first quarter where Miami's only up 3 and then only up 4 at the half, like that was sort of mind-blowing too. And it was kind of a kudos to the Lakers. They've just been scalding hot from 3-point range in the first half specifically. And so you can look at that for them and say, oh, that's actually encouraging. They were so sloppy. They trailed by so much at the beginning, but they came back. They held a lead at one point in the second half. I think it was either at the beginning of the fourth quarter or sometime in the third quarter. They like jumped out. It was tied at 89, and then I think they went up 90-89 or something like that. Forgive me if I'm misspeaking there. This game just felt like it was absolutely all over the place. So yes, that is encouraging for the Lakers, but the Heat can also do some things a little bit better. And Butler, I think you can count on him to come with the same sort of effort. Let's see if he has as much energy after playing almost 45 minutes. So, but if you have a Bam Adebayo, like that's just who has been one of your top 3 players in basically every playoff series here. There's been a lot of talk about Dragic, so I'm hesitant to say that he's been their second best player at points, but he's had some big offensive performances. If you get him back and he's just a semblance of himself, like this becomes a real problem. And it should make life more difficult on Anthony Davis because with the way the Heat feel like they're defending, and if you want like serious X's and O's, I'm not the guy to go to. I've been very open about that on this podcast, but like they're going after LeBron a little bit more, if he's like throwing more bodies at him. And maybe that's just going to make them more inclined to be like, hey, he wasn't the primary defender on Anthony Davis in game 1 where they did lean on a lot of zone. We're just going to make him that moving forward. And I think if you were going to design someone in a lab to guard Anthony Davis, just like you would Giannis Antetokounmpo, it would be Bam Adebayo. We'll see really how that goes. The Lakers have to get him more involved, and that falls on LeBron a little bit in the game, but also if you're not running actions for Davis when LeBron is out of the game, like that's a huge issue as well. So those are all controllable things for the Lakers. But if you're trying to take the pro Miami stance here, which is what I think we need to do, because we've been very open and clear that this just feels like the Lakers series to lose after these injuries, after what we saw in game 1, even before the injuries from the Lakers, where they came back from that 13-point lead. They clearly feel like the superior team. But you look at Miami and you say they're going to get their second best defensive player back. I still think their best defensive player is probably Jimmy Butler. The dude is just a monster. But you get Bam Adebayo back, it's just objectively huge. And maybe some of these guys are just going to start hitting more of their shots from downtown. Like this is now, I think, in 2 of the 3 games, they've now lost the 3-point battle to the Lakers, which is just not like to be only down 2-1 in this series, given the injuries, and like not consistently winning the 3-point battle, where you were a minus in game 2, they were a minus 15 from 3. And then you look at game 1, which feels like forever ago, the 3-point battle, I think it might have went to the Lakers as well. So you've lost the made threes battle in all 3 games thus far. Yeah, they were a minus 12 from 3. So the Lakers have outscored you by 33 points from 3-point range in this series, and you're only down 2-1. That can be encouraging for them. If you think that Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson are going to shoot better from distance, like that becomes a big deal. Hero now has performances of, he was 2 of 8 from 3 in game 1, and you combine that with 2 of 7 in game 3, not so great. And then Duncan Robinson's been laying a lot of bricks in this series. So that's like, you can look at this now, and I feel like you can convince yourself there's a path to Miami winning. I still default to LeBron is not going to commit 8 turnovers in every single game. The Lakers are not going to commit 10 turnovers in the first quarter. They'll figure out a way to get Anthony Davis more involved. And it's not even necessarily a matter of saying, well, Anthony Davis can just score at will, which at times it does feel like he can, but just having him more involved puts a different sort of pressure on the defense. And so I still think this feels like, I picked the Lakers in 6 for the series as a reminder. I would stick with that, particularly now that he took a game. I was more inclined to think this might be a gentleman's sweep or an actual sweep after the injuries. We have to see if Adebayo comes back and what he looks like once he does. But this definitely sets Miami up. I don't know if it necessarily gives them a blueprint to win by just saying Jimmy Butler needs to go supernova, but maybe it does give a blueprint, where in the sense that if you have Jimmy Butler really attacking, which he was also doing in game 2 to his credit, particularly as the game moved on. But if you have Jimmy Butler attacking and you get Bam Adebayo back and you hit just a few more 3-pointers and you can play the Lakers to at least a dead even like they sort of did in game 3 at the free throw line, it feels like there's a path to them winning this series now. Like that's how big game 3 was. You don't want to overreact to it for either side. And I don't think this is the type of game where it shifts perception of the entire series, unless you just thought that the Lakers were going to steamroll them in 4 games, obviously. Still, it gives the Heat like that semblance of hope, because like this is doable. This is probably the toughest game you play, because it's, yes, you lost under the same circumstances in game 2, but in game 3 it's like, all right, I'm not a big must-win guy, but if you lose, you're down 3-0 and the series is just over, and then you're still dealing with these absences where maybe you thought it was only going to be Adebayo out of game, and so now it's a matter of, well, we don't really know if we have a light at the end of the tunnel there. This was the hardest game for them to win, and to their credit, they absolutely won it. And look, for the Lakers turnovers, they finished with 19 on the game after committing 10 in the first quarter. Like, you have to compliment Miami's defense for the pressure that they were putting on the Lakers. LeBron made some super questionable decisions, and I think you can even argue, Miami scored 11 points off 10 turnovers in that first quarter. You could probably argue that they probably should have scored more than that. But credit to their defense for putting a ton of pressure on the ball and forcing the Lakers into some of those mistakes. But a lot of them felt like they could be cleaned up, just like LeBron just not making the right reads and throwing a couple bad passes. You've counted on restaurants. Now they're counting on you. And while their dining rooms may be closed, they're still open for delivery with DoorDash. DoorDash is the app that brings you the food you're craving right to your door. I can confirm this. I've been using DoorDash quite frequently throughout this pandemic that we're all trying to survive. Mostly whenever I've just been jonesing for some wings. Could be the middle of the week. Could be looking for a cheat night. I need my wings sometimes. Large orders. I'm talking like 50 wings or more. And I can eat those pretty much in one sitting. So DoorDash has been great. Whether I need contactless delivery or even if I'm just placing a pickup order, they make that super easy as well. Just open the DoorDash app, choose what you want to eat, and your food will be left safely outside your door with the new contactless delivery drop-off setting. Choose from your favorite national restaurants like Chipotle, Wendy's, and the Cheesecake Factory. But also, many of your favorite local restaurants are still open for delivery too. That's what I've been doing, using all these local, smaller businesses to get my chicken wing fix. DoorDash has them all. Love that they're all just located on there. And right now, get this, our listeners can get $5 off and 0 delivery fees on their first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code BLUEWIRE, all one word. That's $5 off and 0 delivery fees on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code BLUEWIRE. Don't forget, that's code BLUEWIRE, all one word, for $5 off your first order with DoorDash. Moving on, this dovetails, I guess, sort of with the Sixers conversation we're about to have, but per Jason Jones of The Athletic, Buddy Hield has soured on Luke Walton. He's probably not alone, would be my guess, to the point where he's not returning Luke Walton's phone calls. The Athletic's Jason Jones also notes, though, that the Kings aren't going to rush into a decision to move him. And we'll talk about some trade partners here, but they just signed Buddy Hield to a 4-year, $106 million extension before the start of this past season. It's basically a $94 million extension because $12 million of that is in unlikely incentives. So you sign him to that deal and you can make a clear case that, just move him because you have to max out De'Aaron Fox. Richaun Holmes is going to enter free agency in 2021. You've already paid Harrison Barnes. You're going to have to pay Bogdan Bogdanovic this summer. And so this team is going to get expensive quickly, which is not great when you're not a bona fide playoff team, but like you're not even guaranteed to finish top 11 in the Western Conference right now. So there would be some merits to moving him, particularly if you want to pay to keep Bogdanovic. That being said, it's kind of hard to find like Buddy Hield trade partners because I don't think he provides enough. He's a fantastic shooter. I don't know how he would feel about coming off the bench somewhere else as opposed to Sacramento because it does seem like maybe that might be his best role, but he wasn't too happy with it. You put him on a better team, maybe that's different. But I'm just not sure. Like the defense is, he's not a great defender. I don't really know what else to say on that. But I don't know if he's going to provide you with enough like self-creation to actually be worth this contract or to guarantee it. Like you need someone who could maybe do a little bit more off the dribble. And I know the Kings tried to put him in more pick and roll situations last year and it just didn't really end that well. And it felt like that was sort of a harping point for their fans, especially at the beginning of the year, was trying to make Buddy Hield do too much with the ball in his hands. Still, shooting really plays, and Buddy Hield is functional shooting. Like he can fire shots up off the dribble. It's not just standstill looks that he's hitting. He can score them off in motion. And there are a ton of teams where it feels like he would be a fantastic fit, but who's really, you have to give up stuff to get him just because you're looking at what he's making right now. And the Kings clearly value him to that degree, even if they now think that they overpaid, given that this is a new front office regime that's in charge. The Sixers, who we'll talk about, and we mentioned Buddy Hield within the podcast while speaking with Bryan, they seem like the most popular trade partner, but the Al Horford for Buddy Hield swap, it's just not happening on its own. Al Horford is owed 3 years and $81 million, 69 of which is guaranteed. So you can look at it as a 2-year deal, but paying him $13.5 million to go away in year 3 is not nothing. Just want to, in case anyone was wondering that. So what are you putting in as a sweetener? Is Thibault and a first enough? Thibault and number 21 with Al Horford. I would almost hazard no. And now you're getting into the point where, well, can you use Zaire Smith? Like, does he even count as a sweetener at this point? Are you willing to include Shake Milton? I don't know that I would go Shake Milton, Thibault, and a first. I might, if I'm the Sixers, be more inclined to go number 21, a 2022 pick, and then Thibault or Milton for Buddy Hield if I'm also getting rid of Al Horford's money. Maybe the Kings are a team that could talk themselves into Tobias Harris, but it feels a little bit redundant when they have Harrison Barnes, who's a better defender, and Harris is the better scorer, but like both those guys feel like they're best suited or should at least play a ton of their minutes at the four. And at least Horford, I think you can look at up front and say that the Kings really could use a center. Holmes is good, not a defensive anchor, and also headed for free agency in 2021. You don't really know what Marvin Bagley is. After declining Harry Giles' team option, his fourth-year option, he might leave this summer. Bielitsa is good, but like you don't necessarily want him to be your center. And unless you're just really into Marvin Bagley still and think that he could be your center of the future rather than just playing a bunch of power forward as an offensive hub, Horford does make some sense for this team, especially if they want to win now. But still, I just don't know what it takes to move that contract. And I'll stop there because we get into more of this in the podcast. Other teams where it feels like it might make sense, the Magic, we know that they just need shooting, and perhaps Evan Fournier could leave this summer. He has a player option. Even if he doesn't, they just need more shooting on the wings. Aaron Gordon would be a great fit in Sacramento. I'd be curious if you make that move. Should you be Orlando, you'd have to include other money, for one. And then two, now you're saddled with 4 years of Buddy Hield as opposed to 2 years of Aaron Gordon, and Jonathan Isaac's hurt and extension eligible. Like Markel Fultz is extension eligible. You're just in this weird place where I don't know if you can justify making such a substantial addition for someone who's not necessarily young and still has 4 years left on his deal. And it becomes, to me, a lot harder to move Aaron Gordon when you have Isaac out next year. Maybe you're really high on Aminu coming back from injury, and then you have Chuma Okeke, who didn't really play, or who just didn't play at all this year as a rookie. If you think that you're going to get them serious reps, I'd be curious. Look, if Vlade Divac was still there, I would say that Nikola Vucevic would absolutely be like, maybe that's a swap that can work. And then now it's time to just lean into Mo Bamba or Aaron Gordon playing more five, and you have Kevin Birch. But I don't know if the Kings want to invest that much money in a center at this point, and that maybe they would rather have. Like, would you rather have Vooch or Al Horford? I guess you would rather have. Maybe that's a stupid question right now. Vooch is cheaper and he's younger. So yeah, I just don't know. Is Vooch for Buddy Hield? Like, is that framework that makes any sense for Sacramento? I don't know. Are you willing to include anything else if you're Orlando there? And again, I come back to now you have Buddy Hield under contract for 4 years, and it does feel like the Magic are one of those teams that are just on tilt where they could pivot into a rebuild at any moment, or at least that they should. And so going this route might be a little bit weird for them. Looking at other teams, he would be fantastic in Milwaukee. I don't think that they have the asset firepower to get him. A huge part of any hypothetical deal there would be, can you find a third team not only willing to take Eric Bledsoe, but maybe who actually wants Eric Bledsoe? And then how are you building out the offers from there? Like, you can I would give up Dante DiVincenzo for Buddy Hield, and if you include him and a first, you do have pick 24 in this draft, or you can trade a distant first round pick. Is that enough? Like, if we're talking that and salary filler for Buddy Hield, like a first round pick and Dante DiVincenzo, I do not know. And then it's a matter of making the rest of the money work. You're not sending George Hill back to Sacramento. That's just not happening. They might have interest in Brook Lopez, but at that point, I think you get into, well, I'm not high on the final 3 years of Brook Lopez's deal. Then you get into the issue of, well, are we overpaying for Buddy Hield because he's might be a top 50 player, might not be a top 50 player. So there's a lot of things to consider there. Memphis is a spot I love for him. I don't know what you give up. They have ways to match the salary. Just you look at, they have a ton of these mid-level deals. Kyle Anderson at $9.5 million, Tyus Jones at $8.8, Justice Winslow at $13 million, Jonas Valanciunas at $15 million, Gorgie Jang in the final year of his deal at $17.3 million. So, like, they have the means to build some offers, but you don't have a first-round pick in this year's draft. It's headed to Boston. Is Justice Winslow someone who interests the Kings? They do sort of need a lockdown defender, but Memphis went to a great deal of trouble to bring him on. And at the same time, maybe they're more willing to move him because he had the back issues when he arrived there, then couldn't play when they went back to the bubble either. And so are they a little bit more out on him and view it as if they just want to say they've turned cap space into Buddy Hield instead of Justice Winslow? That's fine with them. But how much does a Justice Winslow interest Sacramento? Because he would have to be the meat and potatoes of that deal. Like, you could be fine giving up Grayson Allen. Shot the ball well from 3 this year, but Buddy Hield is a better shooter. So if you can do, there's Justice Winslow and Dylan Brooks. Like, is that something that is going to interest Sacramento? I honestly, I don't know. Dylan Brooks feels like a little redundant in that situation if they're going to keep Bogdan Bogdanovic and you have De'Aaron Fox. Another team that I thought about and that actually might have an easier path to getting Buddy Hield would be Indiana. They have Miles Turner. I have Miles Turner as the better player than Buddy Hield right now. And so how are you building out this deal where Buddy Hield makes more than Miles Turner, is on the books for $18 million. And so you have to give up other money in this trade, which yes, you have Doug McDermott to do, but like, are the Kings sending you anything else back? Victor Oladipo would be interesting. Like, maybe the Kings are trying to make like the star power play where if you can bring in Oladipo and like Oladipo and McDermott for like Buddy Hield, and are you trading a pick? And then you could say, look, this is an all NBA type player. Put him next to De'Aaron Fox. Get him going off the ball a little bit more, which might be good for him following his quad injury. And then he's someone that can go up against these, I don't want to say top tier wings, but he's going to give you solid backcourt defense and then can also defend some threes. Like, maybe they can talk themselves into that. Or again, Miles Turner wouldn't be a terrible fit on this roster either. But Indiana with Buddy Hield, if they're, whoever they hire as their next head coach, if they're really looking to up their 3-point volume, like, he does a great deal for them there. And I think knowing Indiana's track record where they give up big name players and they don't want to pivot into these rebuilds, and I'm specifically thinking of the Paul George trade when you look at how they fleshed out that return where they took Sabonis and Oladipo and everyone thought they could have gotten more, should have gone a different direction. If they're interested in still competing post Oladipo trade, which would be my guess, because they had to know that this was a possibility when you went out and you got Malcolm Brogdon and even Jeremy Lamb before his injury, traded for TJ Warren. Someone like a Buddy Hield would interest them because I feel like he helps them raise that floor for them. And that's really all I have on the teams where I feel like could talk themselves into going for Buddy Hield. Like, Denver could use his shooting, but how much do you damage your defense if you go Gary Harris and another smaller salary for Buddy Hield? Like, that would just be an incredibly interesting fit. You could talk yourself into Dallas maybe too, but you need to get stops if you're the Mavericks. And unless you're going to get someone who's maybe a little bit more adept at creating his own shot, like a Danilo Gallinari, I'm not sure that giving up Tim Hardaway Jr. and then a first and then other money for Buddy Hield necessarily tracks there. Atlanta, dead last in 3-point shooting this year. They have cap space, just straight. They could take Buddy Hield's cap space into their book. So, I mean, if it's a matter of, the Kings will take number 6 for Buddy Hield, yeah, I would do it. I just don't know how much he ends up helping you. Playing him and Kevin Huerter and Trae Young at the same time is probably a non-starter. And even if you're playing him with a Cam Reddish and a DeAndre Hunter, like, that puts a lot of pressure on the defense. John Collins is still there, and he's like not as bad defensively as he was as a rookie, but he's not someone that's going to necessarily help your cause if the cost is right. But if he's going to cost you Cam Reddish or DeAndre Hunter, I probably balk. Or I would say this: I give up one of number 6, Reddish or Hunter, and I would honestly be more inclined to give up Hunter at this point. But you might prefer to have Hunter just because his positional optionality is a little bit more rangier than Cam Reddish. And if you're going to bring Buddy Hield in, like, you're very much saying we're going to play him at the 2, or we're just going to, if we play him at the 3, like, those are going to be lineups where the defense could get rolled. So if you can give up one of those players to get him, and then I'd be fine including Huerter. Maybe Sacramento is interested in John Collins. I don't know about that when they have Marvin Bagley there already. But if it just takes one of Reddish, Hunter, and number 6, one of those, I want to reiterate, as the headlining piece, and then you build out the offer from there. That's when I think that it would be something to talk about. The last team I'll mention, I don't really know if this makes a ton of sense, but if you're the Celtics and maybe you're looking to like get off a little money this year and you're worried about what Gordon Hayward's next contract is going to look like, building a framework around Gordon Hayward, like for Buddy Hield deals, like, not. Is it that bonkers? Like, would Sacramento have interest in Gordon Hayward? Let's say Gordon Hayward and, the Celtics have 3 first-round picks. And so it's weird to take, like, you're taking on long-term money in this situation, and Gordon Hayward's, like, a good player when he's healthy, but, like, would they be willing to go 26 and 30 in Gordon Hayward for Buddy Hield? there might need to be more money involved, or there definitely need to be more money involved because Hayward's player option is $34.2 million. Buddy Hield is making 26, so it comes pretty close. So it would just take a small salary to make the money work there. And I'm looking just at Sacramento's books. Like they don't really have like a super small salary to give up. Now that I'm looking at it, like you would have to go with a Justin James there. So that's perhaps they're willing to do that. It does seem like, from what I know, that they like him. But if maybe they view Gordon Hayward as just someone, an extra ball handler, an extra creator, maybe that they can rely on a little bit more defensively, but that's like sort of reach, and you have to worry about paying him his next deal. Still, if you're getting 2 first-round picks as part of the equation, I might even consider it if it's 14 and you're just picking up another lottery pick. If I'm Boston, they don't need Buddy Hield to do anything for them on defense than just having that other 3-point outlet. Who knows how he would feel about being part of sort of this success by committee, though? If he had a problem in Sacramento, is it going to be much better in Boston? Who knows? Those are teams, though, that spring to mind as Buddy Hield destinations. I have rambled enough, though. Let's start talking some Philadelphia 76ers with Bleacher Reports and Forbes and the NBA pods. Bryan Toporek. The wait is finally over. Football is back. You might not be at a game this year, but you can still be in on the action at BetOnline. BetOnline is going the extra mile to make sure you can get in on every possible chance to win this season. From game spreads and totals to team, player, and coaching props, BetOnline gives you more options to wager on than anywhere else. You can get in on their season opening bonuses today and start off wagering on wins, division odds, and championship futures all day, every day. Head to BetOnline today and take advantage of all the great sign-up bonuses. Don't forget to use promo code BLUEWIRE, all one word, at betonline.ag. That's Blue Wire, all one word. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Bryan, welcome to the Hardwood Knocks podcast for the first time. I don't know why it's taken us this long to bring you on, or at least me specifically to bring you on, because we've been, I'll put in quotes, coworkers, because I don't know how often we've interacted, but almost a decade at this point. So talk about dropping the ball. But I'm excited to have you on for the first time, so I appreciate you coming on.
Well, thank you for having me. Hopefully not the last time, because we've been colleagues, can we say, for a decade. But yeah, it's long overdue, and I'm both excited and sad to talk about the Sixers.
Yeah, at least they're fascinating, but like it's like it's like a car wreck that you can't really look away from. So right. It's like that type of deal. I'll start off with this though. I told you this, and then Doc Rivers was hired. I said, look, I'm going to be reaching out to you as soon as they pick their coach so that we can do. I didn't want to date. The Sixers are the team you don't want to do a look ahead for, because you know that it's going to be dated like in 2 days because something's going to happen. I was like, let's at least wait for the coaching hire. So then I feel like 5 seconds after that, basically, Doc Rivers gets hired. You wrote about this for Forbes. It was a really good article where you're focusing on, the X's and O's he brings. Like, that's one focus, but there's going to be the emotional aspect of how he juggles what's going on with this team. How do you feel though overall about the hire? Is there anything you specifically like about it, or that you are super concerned about?
Yeah. Before he became available and it was pretty clearly going to be either Mike D'Antoni or Ty Lue, I was pretty team Ty, mostly just because the MDA fit with Embiid in particular had me nervous. And I have a half-written Forbes article that will never see the light of day that was titled "Sixers hiring Mike D'Antoni wouldn't force a Joel Embiid trade ... yet." So, I think Doc is kind of the best of both worlds, right? So he, like Ty, has the championship experience. Like MDA, he's got the experience dealing with a bunch of different superstars, and he just has more coaching experience in general, whether it's, the big three in Boston, the Lob City Clippers, now Kawhi and Paul George. So he's used to dealing with guys with big egos, which is good. Some of the stuff that has come out, both from Kevin Arnovitz in 2018, he kind of did a post-mortem on the Lob City Clippers, and more or less said like Doc was not blameless with regard to the chemistry issues that plagued that team. And then, Jovan Buha of The Athletic did a piece in January, I believe, starting kind of hinting at some behind the scenes chemistry issues, and a lot of Clippers people got mad at him And then, after Doc left, departed mutually, whatever, however they phrase it, published another article where it kind of, again, said, like, Doc was not necessarily great in terms of reaching all of these guys, and he had to bridge the gap between these hired guns in Kawhi and Paul George, and then the last year's team that overachieved with Montrezl, Lou Williams, Pat Bev, all these guys, and he couldn't quite fit the puzzle pieces together. So, do I think that Doc Rivers is going to be single-handedly the difference between a first-round sweep and a championship next year? No. I love Brett Brown. I think Brett Brown's a great guy. I hope he gets back in the league somewhere. Up until this year, I was not in favor of firing him. I thought the speculation last year was pretty unfair. I do think, and Brett even said it after they got swept, he said, I didn't do a great job with this roster this year. Like, I just couldn't quite figure out how to make it work. And I don't know that anyone can. I mean, we'll get into it, but there are some major fit questions with the principal pieces involved, and it's not going to be easy to move off of some of them. So, I mean, I'm excited to see what Doc brings to the table. I think his experience with a non-shooting point guard in Rondo and a guy like Blake Griffin, who's a big guy who can also pass really well, that intrigues me with how he's going to use Simmons. And that's really, going into this whenever his presser is, like, that's the question I want him to answer is, like, what do you envision Ben Simmons' role being on offense, especially in the half court? He had KG in Boston and DeAndre Jordan with the Clippers. So, like, he's coached some all-star bigs as well. Like, that should give him more familiarity with an archetype like Embiid versus a guy like D'Antoni, where you can't see the fit working. And then, Woj mentioned it in his story. Tobias Harris had a career 2.5 of a year, I guess, with Doc and the Clippers. So I'm excited to see if he can, tap back into that, because the Sixers gave him a 5-year, $180 million contract last summer, and they need to get more return on investment than they did this year.
If there's the Tobias Harris element is one I didn't think about. I will say, though, so you talk about, like, the behind-the-scenes stuff, and I have a follow-up question about that in a second, and I think that's obviously concerning based off the struggles he seemed to have with 2 different iterations of the Clippers. That being said, even with the Clippers offense, while they were, like, good this year, it just felt like there was, I don't want to say no rhyme or reason to it because that's just mean, but, like, there just wasn't a flow. And for a team like Philly that desperately needs something resembling a flow on offense, that's what's going to worry me about Doc. But then when you mentioned Tobias Harris, I'm like, that Clippers team after the Blake Griffin trade, like, that was genuinely fun. They did some cool stuff, and perhaps that's the hope. But my biggest concern is, like, well, he was there dealing with that where they were devoid of superstar egos. And now you're coming into a Sixers organization where it feels like they've emboldened Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid specifically to the point of entitlement. And I'm not sure how accurate that would be. And is Doc really going to lay the hammer down? Like, it seems like they might be on the one hand, I'm like, I hate when people, I feel like I've mentioned this a zillion times now on this podcast, I hate when people box coaches into a corner or, like, try and pigeonhole them. And I feel like it happens a lot with black head coaches where it's like, they're great motivators and you're not really focusing on, like, what they can do as a tactician. Here I'm actually worried about, like, is he going to be the one to inspire this team or discipline this team? Because we know I wouldn't say he's as laid back as like Mike D'Antoni feels like. Yeah. But they don't practice. Like, are they going to practice during the regular season? They're probably not going to have shoot-arounds. Like, that became a thing. Is he going to get away from that? Because it seems like this team might need that type of structure. And it's something that I think, Jimmy Butler said it, like, maybe more bluntly. And then I feel like JJ Redick has hinted at it a couple times. It feels like this team needs that type of structure. And I'll give Doc the benefit of the doubt that I think all head coaches, with the exception of Tom Thibodeau and Jim Boylan, are more adaptive than anyone gives them credit for. So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt there, but, like, that's a real thing that needs to happen, where I feel like if he takes the approach that he had, even with the non-superstar Clippers, like, that he had for a season and a half, however long it was, I don't know that ends up working with this team.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Josh Richardson, after they got swept, like, straight out said they did not have accountability this year and they need more of it next year. And, as much as I make fun of #Heat culture, he's coming from that organization, and that was the one he started his career with. That's the only other one he's known. So for him to come to Philly and just bluntly say, like, we didn't have this and we need it, it was a wake-up call. And that was a lot, after Brett got fired, that was a prevailing theme in the Zoom call with Elton Brand, was like, how do you establish this culture of accountability? And, he said it starts with him and the front office, but it's going to trickle down to the coaches and the players. So we had Tomer Azarly of Clutch Points on our pod yesterday. He's based in LA, has been covering the Clippers for a while now. So he had some good insight into just how, the teams responded to Doc. And he said he's optimistic that he thinks one of the big selling points for Doc is that he will get Ben and Joel to buy in. Now, how long that lasts, I think, is the big question. But I think at first, I do think the Sixers team just needed a new voice in the front of the room. And, I don't think Doc Rivers, I don't know that he's, a top 5 tactician in the league, but I don't think he's like Jim Boylan or Luke Walton. I think he's in that, that gray area in the middle where it's like, he's not Spoelstra, he's not Popovich, he's not Rick Carlisle, but, I think he is a genuinely good coach in a number of facets. He has some stubborn tendencies, and Tomer highlighted, he was stuck with Montrez over Zubac in the playoffs for way too long against Denver. So, you have to worry about if they don't make major moves this offseason, is stubbornly try to force the Al Horford thing, even though we saw it doesn't really work that well. One of the things I wanted in their next coach, regardless of who it was, you just need to experiment in the regular season and try out different things. I think if the playoffs have underscored one thing, it's that versatility in this day and age is going to win more often than not. And teams are, when you get to the playoffs, teams are going to be able to take away or try to take away. They know what your strengths are. They're going to specifically target those. So if you have ways to adapt and you've practiced those throughout the regular season, then you're not going to be caught off guard. But if you've been playing the same way every game, like, Mike Budenholzer's Bucks, and then a team figures out a strategy to stop you, then you're like, uh-oh, right? Maybe we should have tried something else in the regular season. That's what, as with Spo and the zone, as much as it's fun to say zone is for cowards, the Heat broke that out a lot in the regular season, and it paid major dividends in the playoffs. So, I hope Doc can take his experience from, both Lob City and this past year's Clippers team and realize some of his shortcomings. But then also we'll see how he fills out his staff too. I mean, we saw Woj mention Alvin Gentry as a possibility for one of his assistant coaches. Based on what I've heard from some New Orleans guys, they seem to love that fit. So, this is not a finished product, either coaching staff or roster at the moment.
Yeah, and I think the bigger thing for me is it doesn't matter whether they hire Mike D'Antoni or Ty Lue. It's the personnel rather than the coach that's going to define this team, because it's such a, round peg, square hole situation, square peg, round hole, however it goes. And to that point, I'm going to say this one more time for the people in the back, and we've gotten pushback on this podcast specifically from listeners whom love every single one of you. You do not move Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons. It's not happening right now. It's not happening. You don't default to giving up 2 top 15 players unless you assume you don't have a way out. And as bad as their books look right now, they don't know for a fact that they can't figure out something else to do because they haven't tried it. See what they can do over the offseason first. To that point, though, because they are and look, the other thing is they've been a net plus together on the court for the past 3 years. This season was the closest they came to not being a net positive on the court. I think so plus 1.8 points per 100 possessions per cleaning the glass. That's not an offensive rating in the 22nd percentile, which is just so bad. But because they're not the perfect fits, how much does it matter that they seemingly don't like each other? And people can point to Kobe and Shaq or the Lob City era Clippers, and here would be my rebukes. Kobe and Shaq won titles. This team has not, and I actually wouldn't use the Lob City Clippers as a good example because they fell apart. like in the playoffs at points, and there was like this grating aura about them, like that you could just sense even when they were at their peak. And like I feel like even JJ Redick then might have hinted at it. So how much then does it actually matter that they don't like each other? Or don't love each other. I don't even know how to put it. Like, do they actually hate each other? But how much does it matter that their relationship isn't? Let's say it's not peachy keen.
Right. I mean, they're not like Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, who genuinely seem to like each other and you fit well on the court together. You cannot envision a Boston Celtics future in which both of those guys aren't there for the next 5 years. Like, I can very easily envision a Sixers future in which one of Ben or Joe is not there. Even in a few years. I'm with you that, right now, I think they want to see what Doc brings to the table and how he can get these guys working in concert with each other, and then also with whatever supporting cast is in place. During Elton Brand's conference about firing Brett, he said straight up, I'm not trading these guys this offseason. They're 24 and 26. They want to be here for a long time. We want to better complement them. Now, that will be easier said than done, but I would hope. I mean, I'm hoping they're watching the finals right now, because like that is, LeBron James and Anthony Davis would be the end goal for those two guys. In theory, they have similar, like Ben has a similar skill set and build to LeBron, and Embiid could be the Anthony Davis. Not saying those guys are there yet. They're not. LeBron and AD are significantly better than Ben and Joel, but seeing how those guys are working and have really dominated these playoffs. They're 2 wins away from a ring right now, and it doesn't seem like Miami has a chance to stop them. So it would not shock me if things go south this year, if we really do start to have the conversation of trading one of Ben or Joe. And I think it would probably be Joe on the move, just because, I mean, he hasn't been shy about admitting that he was really pissed off that they did not bring back JJ Redick and Jimmy Butler.
I would assume
he was on Redick's. Yeah, no, and he was on Redick's podcast. I think it was in August, and he said like the offseason changes. Like, I just wasn't having fun playing basketball this year. Like, I was mentally checked out. I was like kind of going through the motions, and that's just not only is it not what you want to hear from your franchise center, from the guy you're paying that much money, but like you have to wonder, if things don't change, are we just going to get 60% Joe? I mean, you could see it this season. Like I don't want to play like body language doctor, but like the Joel Embiid that was here this year was not the same player that was here last year. And if the fit issues,
you could see it on defense at points. It felt like, and he was dominant defensively when he was on the court by and large, but like you could just see it on certain possessions.
Yeah. So if those fit issues continue, do we run into the same problems next year? And if so, then I think it's reasonable to start. I'm not saying they're under any pressure to trade either one of these guys. Ben just signed the extension. He's locked up for 5 more years. Embiid still got 3 more years on his deal. So, I feel like when you're 2 years away from free agency, that's when we start to have so what are we doing here? Like, are we married long term or not? Because, then you can get, if you wait till 2022, then it's like he's going to demand a trade like Anthony Davis and force your hand. So, yeah, I don't think Doc takes this job, honestly. If Elton Brand, I'm sure he asked Elton, like, what's the plan here? Are we going to keep these guys? Right. Or are we open to trading one? And I don't think he takes the job if Elton's like, well, we might trade it. We might trade Embiid this offseason. I don't know. We'll see.
Can Embiid be the best player on a championship team?
It's a really good question, and it's one I've been grappling with throughout the postseason, really, because he put up good numbers in that Celtics series. I think he averaged around 30 and 12, and they got their heads beat in for 4 straight games. Now,
even look at that. Was it the Raptors series last year where they lost that series during the minutes he was not on the floor, and so like that team went on to win the title, and so that would lend you to believe, he can easily be the best player on a championship team.
Right. I mean, they were I think it was plus 90 with him on the court, and I think it was minus 109 in 99 minutes with him off the court. So if they have, if they just have a replacement level backup center, they probably win that series, and you could make the argument that they would go on to win the title last year. So, I think the question isn't necessarily Embiid specifically. I think it's more just how championship teams are constructed in today's NBA. And I think you need a star two-way wing to have a legit chance at a title.
They should have traded for one in the middle of last year named Jimmy Butler and then re-signed him. That would have been a good idea.
I know, it's crazy. I wonder where they could have possibly gotten a star two-way wing. But, as you said, if they win the title last year, Joel Embiid's the best player on that team, I think. But, Jimmy Butler is 1A, 1B with him. So I think he needs that type of player next to him to win a title. Can Ben Simmons develop into that player? Hopefully. I mean, that's what they're going to need. I don't think Tobias Harris can. So, a lot of this ultimately, it all still rides on Ben and Joe. And I think they had a lot more margin for error a couple of years ago before they started making all these trades. And, now their cap their books are just totally shot. So, they regardless of what happens with them moving forward, I think those two guys, even though they are an imperfect fit, could have won a title together. But I am wondering now if it's if they've made so many mistakes over the last few years that it might be too far gone. And, maybe this iteration of the Sixers can't win a title together, but I don't think they're ready to give up on it quite yet.
On the Ben Simmons side of this, how important is it, or one, do you ever see Ben Simmons expanding his range? I'm not even talking about to the 3-point line. How about outside the 3-foot line, basically? That's obviously hyperbolic. Do you ever see that happening? And then ultimately, though, how important is that happening if you want the Embiid partnership to work? Because part of me is just if he even just hit more of his free throws, maybe they would just be fine. But then I'm no, you know what? There needs to be more variance to his offensive range. But I'm just curious as to what you think about if you want this partnership to work. And regardless of even if they put the right personnel around them at one point, does Ben Simmons need to expand his offensive portfolio in some form?
I think so. I mean, I think the focus on it can be overblown at times because it tends to ignore everything else that he brings. If people are saying Ben Simmons is an all-star because he can't shoot, that's just objectively not true. He's one of the best, most versatile defenders in the NBA right now, as evidenced by him being on the All-NBA team. He's fantastic. I wrote a piece for Forbes going into this past season saying the jump shot alone will not make or break his season. Does he take strides defensively? His finishing around the rim, he's getting better, but he can still improve in that regard as well. As you mentioned, the free throw percentage needs to go up. I think, that in concert with him finishing around the rim, if he is more confident in his ability to shoot free throws and he's a better finisher around the rim, that's going to make him just a more effective offensive player, in and of itself. But ultimately, yes, he does need to eventually start taking jump shots. And I do think, we saw it this past season when he hit the shot, I think it was early against Cleveland, and Brett Brown after the game is tell his friends, tell his manager, tell his agent, I want to see at least one three per game from Ben moving forward. And Ben didn't take another three for, I think, 25 games. Wow. So, yeah, so that was not great. And, I think Doc will probably come in and issue the same challenge, but will say hey, man, I'm not messing around. You're actually going to take at least 1 3 a game. Because, Ben has been working on that shot. Everyone around Sixers prac, I'm not at the practices every day. I live in Baltimore and I used to be in Nashville. So I'm not in Philly directly. But everyone around the team says he's working on it. And, he knows he needs to add it to his game to hit his ceiling. I think it's true for any NBA player. DeAndre Jordan would be a much better NBA player if he could hit 3-pointers. He never added that to his game, and that capped his ceiling. Ben Simmons, if he wants to hit that MVP level, if he stagnates right now, he can be a consistent all-star or fringe all-NBA guy for the rest of his career. That's cool, but he won't hit his ceiling. He could be, top 10, top 5 even if he's got a consistent jumper. So Yeah, I mean, especially given, Embiid's preference to work down low and like just his dominance in that area of the court, you're going to need to put spacers around him. So, I think it is something that ultimately it needs to come around if this thing is going to last beyond the next few years. But I don't think we're going to see Ben Simmons bombing 10 threes a night next year either. I think it's going to be slower than a lot of people would like.
I think because of that though, like there is, as you mentioned, like an underappreciation for what he actually does. Like a fantastic passer, but really his defense, he has to be one of the three most versatile defenders in the NBA right now. And I was writing about this, like it was in an article I wrote semi recently, like his versatility and the B-ball indexes. Krishna Narshu has the basic defensive versatility measurement. And among everyone who played at least 500 possessions this past season, only OG Anunoby, James Harden, which is just funny because of how they move him around to hide him, and Ronald Hollis Jefferson only graded out as more versatile. And then you look at among everyone who played at least 1,000 minutes this season, only Terrence Ferguson, Royce O'Neal, and Torrey Craig spent more time guarding number one options. And so the workload that he carries, like I know Joel Embiid is kind of the heart and soul of that defense because not of what he just does at the rim, because of what his presence at the rim actually means. Like it warps an entire team shot selection. But like Ben Simmons can be in the defensive player of the year conversation in any given season. And yet I think I'm in firm agreement with you. It's just that it feels, you shouldn't be able to say this about a top 15 player now, top 15, top 20. It feels like he's like so far short of what his ceiling might be, where it's like, we're not even talking about it. I feel like if he had any semblance of a floater, a mid-range jumper, like a standstill 3-pointer of like Aaron Gordon level, like standstill 3-pointer or something, we're looking at a top 5 player with multiple MVP awards. And that just like is, I know shooting is like this fundamental thing that we can't just say, well, if he had this, like that's a big part of the game. So he doesn't have it and it matters. But he's already just so good where it's similar to Giannis, where it's at least Giannis is taking them though. But if Giannis was hitting his threes at a league average clip, like imagine like what that would mean for him. But Giannis is at the level where he's taking them like these, like, turnaround jumpers or 3-pointers, and he's won multiple MVPs now. Maybe even Ben Simmons kind of like putting pressure on defenses, not necessarily in the form of efficiency, but even volume. Like maybe that changes the perception of him a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to, I think Stan Van Gundy was on Howard Beck's podcast a while ago, and they were talking about this, and it was either Howard Beck or Zach Lowe. I think it was Beck though.
I think it was Beck. I remember that episode. Yeah. Stan Van Gundy's so good, by the way. I love him.
Yeah, he was, and Beck was making this point about like, yes, Ben does a lot of things well, but ultimately, like, he does need to add this shot. And Stan Van Gundy was pushing back a little bit because Beck brought up Giannis as well, and Stan Van Gundy's like, teams aren't guarding Giannis. Like, they're goading him into that shot. So I mean, it's tricky because I think during the regular season, teams, you just don't have time to prepare for individual matchups every night. So you might be able to like goad people into guarding Ben Simmons, but once you get into a playoff series, like teams will be inviting him to take that shot. I don't know that it necessarily changes their defensive tactics at all. They're going to leave him wide open until he proves that he can hit, a reasonable percentage of them. But again, I just think for like the psychological spacing aspect of it, I do think it is important for him to eventually add it. I don't want to compare him to LeBron at any point because like LeBron is just LeBron, no matter what portion of his career you take him, is better than current Ben Simmons. But it feels like Ben is in the like 07 LeBron era where, you remember like the Spurs finals, they were just leaving LeBron wide open and daring him to shoot, and he would. And just like it was a low efficiency strategy. 07 LeBron didn't have Joel Embiid, so that can hide some of Ben's weakness. But LeBron didn't start winning rings until he added that credible jump shot. So again, I think it's going to be a slow process. I don't think this happens. I don't think he's going to hit a high volume of threes next year at a respectable percentage. I would love to be wrong, but I just think it's going to take more time than that. But I mean, I think, like, again, like that's one of the big questions for Doc is like, how do you get him to this point? And we
like
saw
Brett was openly like pining for Ben Simmons to shoot
right.
threes in the press.
Right. And like we saw, Doc with Blake Griffin. We saw Blake over time. Blake Griffin came into the league with the reputation of like just a dunker, doesn't do anything from beyond 5 feet, and like over time has developed into a pretty good shooter for a big man. So
he hit more pull-up threes in 2018, 2019 than rookie Trae Young. That's how far Blake Griffin came.
That is the trajectory you would like for Ben Simmons to take over time. But again, how many years did that take for Blake Griffin to get to that point? So like bottom line, yes, it's important. No, it's not the only thing he needs to improve upon, this offseason, next season, whatever. Like the finishing around the rim and the free throws, I think are equally important with regard to his offensive upside.
Here's, I think, an interestingly difficult question. Who's more important to the Sixers' future? Matisse Thybulle, Josh Richardson, or Shake Milton?
So I actually don't think this is that difficult.
All right. Well, then I'm out of touch.
well, and here's why. So, I mean, Josh Richardson in a vacuum is the best player of those three. But, he's going to be a free agent in 2021. And again, I mean, we'll see what happens with Doc. I think clearly his first year in Sixers land did not go as he would have liked. He didn't play as well as he would have hoped. I love Josh Richardson, and I think this was probably just a bad year, and hope he's a lot better next year. But I guess there is a question of whether he's a great fit next to Ben and Joel, just because they tried him out as a backup point guard. That did not work very well. Great defender, but not a consistent 3-point shooter, and you need guys to be able to knock down threes. So if that high volume doesn't come, you wonder whether he has a long-term place. And ultimately, if they're going to make bigger moves this offseason, he's on a very affordable contract. You could use him as part of the bait to get off of one of Horford or Tobias. So I think it comes down to Shake and Thybulle, and it's really just which do you prioritize, defense versus offense. And I think for the Sixers' specific needs next to Ben and Joel, I think Shake, especially on the contract that he's on, it's 3 years, 1 point some minimum $1 million per year. Given the Sixers' financial issues, I think like he's basically their best hope of getting out of this thing and keeping that pairing intact. So I would go Shake here. And that's with all due respect to Thybulle, who, is a fantastic defender already, but the shot is just so inconsistent. And again, like next to Ben and Joel specifically, you need guys to be able to actually knock down catch and shoot threes.
Yeah, and look, I mean, like he's never going to be, or it doesn't look like he profiles as the guy that's going to like dribble a lot at any point either.
No.
I would have so I didn't realize Shake Milton was under contract for 3 more years. That's just, I guess, something that kind of flew under the radar for me. So I get that pick. And with Josh Richardson hitting free agency in 2021, I understand why he wouldn't be the pick. But for me, he almost was, because it feels like they need functional shooting with a little bit of ball handling. And like he can, I know he was inconsistent last year, but if you gave him like a little bit better spacing, I feel like he could be that guy. But then when you're looking at affordability, just impending free agency in general, it would be hysterical if he ends up with the Heat in 2021, by the way. Next to
I agree.
If he lasts 2 seasons in Philly, he might just be like foaming at the mouth to get back to the Heat culture, and maybe he'll go back there. But with Shake under contract, that's for the next 3 years at under a total of $6 million. That's a really good point. But like that just puts like an awful lot of pressure on him, because he looked overmatched at times during the postseason. I don't know how much of a learning curve you can afford to give him when your hopes are so immediate.
Right. Yeah, I don't think he should be a full-time point guard. I think he profiles as a combo. Like he can be a ball handler, but I think probably better off as a secondary ball handler rather than primary. And again, this goes back to like what is Ben Simmons' role in the half-court offense? Is he a point guard? Is he your full-time point guard or not? Because that's going to lead into what types of players are you going after this offseason? Yeah, I mean, like, again, I think Josh is going to have a better year next year. And like part of me hopes that he looks at the landscape in 2021 and, it's with the COVID financial uncertainty, we just don't know how much cap space there's going to be, and like maybe he decides to take a short-term extension, because then my answer might pivot to him instead. But yeah, I have a piece coming out at Fansided in a few weeks about the Sixers in 2030, and it's basically just the most bleak projection of like how these series of missteps can continue, and one of them does involve Josh Richardson going back to the Heat in 2021. So good call there.
I'm not sure to what extent I'm like, I would say shin deep in draft prep at this point, which is not high at all. It's like a little higher than ankles, but not much higher than that. Is there anyone that you like for the Sixers that you think could be available at number 21, or is your just expectation that it doesn't even really matter because whoever they're taking is not going to start the season on the roster?
That's a fair question. Well, if they sell the pick, I will write a 3,000 word screed at Forbes just raging about it. But I mean, that is one of their big trade chips, not only 21, but they have 2 early seconds plus 2 seconds in the further down in the round. So again, if they are trying to move off of one of Horford or Tobias, I would expect those would be up for grabs. I think ultimately they're going to need a point guard in some capacity. Having one functional point guard on the roster might help. And luckily, it seems like in that range, there actually should be a decent number of them. Kira Lewis, if he slips, I think would be a good fit. I know some people on Sixers Twitter. I don't know if it's at 21 or maybe it's one of these early seconds, but Desmond Bane's gotten some hype. Grant Riller's gotten some hype, because I think ultimately you need ball handlers and shooters. Like, you've got forwards, you got centers. We're set there. No more bigs, please. Go after point guard, shooting guard, those types. Tyrese Maxey is another guy if he falls that far. Jamius Ramsey, I don't know how you say his name, but the kid from Texas Tech. Any of those options. Like, I think they're actually in. All of these teams in the top 10 are trying to trade down because they don't want. They're like, we don't like any of these guys that much. I think at 21, the Sixers are actually probably going to have some good options, and even at 34 and 36. So given their financial reality over the next couple of years, like, this may be their best chance to add some very inexpensive young talent. And I genuinely hope they take advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want to say it sucks, but like, they're in a situation where there could be some intriguing players to me that would fall. Like, they could be great swing pieces, but like, if they still have questions about like, if it's an RJ Hampton or a Cole Anthony who falls, it's like, well, maybe you should get them on them, but it's like, well, like, if their jumpers don't pan out, well, then like, you're just completely screwed. I'd be interested to see whether they could. I just don't have a feel for this draft at all. Even reading like the mocks and the big boards I don't know like who's gonna fall where. Like I've fallen in love with Patrick Williams. There's always a guy or two that I just fall in love with, who's not like one of the top guys. And he was like mocked like in the low 20s at one point, and now he's like on like number 7 on people's big boards. And so it's like I don't think they could afford it, even if he was there, which I don't think he would be. His jumper's too unestablished for them to probably give him a chance. But I'm wondering if, because it's this draft where it's so hard to have a feel for it, like, do you have when you're talking about smaller scale moves instead of swinging for the fences, do you have like a little bit of juice to move up and maybe get in a position to get like a Sadiq Bey or a Devin Vassell? I don't know where those guys are going. Are they going to go inside the top 10? Out? If they're going inside the top 10, then no, you probably don't have the juice to get in there. If they're going to fall outside the top 10, well, then it's like, well, maybe. But I kind of almost default to I think that this pick is eventually just going to be traded.
Yeah, I lean toward that as well, whether, as you said, it could be a trade up, or, I mean, I think most likely even more than a trade up is if they're trading this pick, they're probably trying to get out of Horford in particular.
So before I get into that Horford, Tobias Harris stuff, the Sixers are going to use the mini MLE, right? Like, do we need to worry about their governors not ponying up the $5 million and change, whatever it's going to end up being?
I hope so. I don't know. I mean, they've sworn that they were willing to pay the luxury tax.
Well, they're not going to have a choice on that next season.
Right. Right. But I mean, that is part of the problem, is that I think they built this roster assuming the cap would continue going up. I mean, by all reasonable projections, it's going to stay flat. So they're already going to be think about 17 million over the tax line. And once you start to get into that like 20 to 25 million dollar over range, it gets really expensive really quickly. Like a $5 million contract ends up costing you, I think, close to 25 to 30 million ultimately. So, that's probably another question that I hope Doc Rivers asked in this interview. It's like, what, are you guys gonna cheap out, or like, do you have empty pockets like Ballmer that you just don't care? I would hope that they do, and I think again, a point guard's probably the way to go here.
No.
Well, last year they spent it on Mike Scott, which backfired significantly because as much as I love Mike, and he is.
You signed fucking Al Horford. What are you doing burning that money on Mike Scott after doing that?
It blows my mind. Mike played well, and I think he had some, clearly the locker room loves him.
He has emojis tattooed on him. He's clearly a legend, but
yeah.
Right. What are you the decision making there was worse than questionable.
Yeah, it was a complete misallocation of resources. Like if you bring him back on a minimum contract, great, but don't use. I think they ended up using the room exception on him, and it was just like, it's just such a low key mistake compared to what they gave Tobias and Al that it flies under the radar. But I think it was similarly detrimental to their. Because they had to rely on Howell Neto and Trey Burke for most of the year, and Trey Burke fell into Brett Brown's doghouse nonstop, and so they just did not have a good answer at backup point guard. And then when Ben went down, it was like, all right, well, there goes our best wing defender and our best point guard.
Right, and the other thing is couldn't you have gotten? And obviously this doesn't solve the point guard issue, but there just seemed why not Wesley Matthews? He only signed for the minimum with Milwaukee.
Yeah.
You couldn't have gotten him for the room exception. And look at how important he ended up being to them. He did fantastic defending Jimmy Butler relative to the task of defending Jimmy Butler
right.
in the series that the Bucks lost. So it's just you would think that, again, even if you couldn't get a point guard, wouldn't you? I just feel like you would default to a wing or someone who's a little bit more plug and play, or just at least not you signed Horford to play power forward, and then I think the reality is Tobias Harris is going to have to play some minutes at power forward. So why would you go ahead and then sign a 4-5 with the room exception? That's just bizarre.
Yeah. If you have four bigs in Simmons, Embiid, Horford, and Harris, you're good. Your minutes are good there. It's already impossible to fit all four of those guys where they need to be. I really do think it was just try to carry over some of the good vibes from last year, and it just totally backfired. So
do you have any free agents that you think could fall in that price range that you like for the Sixers this offseason?
Yeah, so that's the problem. It gets really bleak at point guard after Fred VanVleet. I don't think Goran Dragic is a realistic target at the taxpayer MLE. I would love to be wrong about that, but it feels like
even with his torn plantar, I don't know if that would lower his value enough. I still think he probably feels like he's in line for that huge 1-year windfall from Miami.
Yeah, that would be my guess too, that they'll just try to keep him and Jay Crowder and then punt it to 2021. So I think he's off the board. So
Jeff Teague, maybe?
Yeah, I was going to say Jeff Teague or DJ Augustine are probably the best bets. And it's, neither you feel great about, but again, these aren't going to be, you're not playing these guys 35 minutes a night. It's come off the bench, play 15 to 20 minutes. Reggie Jackson, maybe. Playoff Rondo, let's just save him.
The state of the Sixers in the backcourt is such that it feels like they can't lose Alec Burks, who's not even a point guard, but it's just he can dribble and shoot. Someone else who would be a great fit, but I don't know. I know he's a non-Bird RFA, but I don't know, or early Bird RFA, excuse me. But Javon Carter would be perfect for this team. I just don't know how serious Phoenix and the money that Philly can give him. It's just why wouldn't Phoenix just keep him at that point? And that's the other thing I struggle with is I almost thought I know you want a point guard, but Ben Simmons is a really good passer. So if you surrounded him with maybe a Gallo or something, but you can't even work out sign and trade scenarios because the Sixers are just so far past what the expected apron is at this point. And so I don't know what you do because you said, the point guard market is worse than bare bones at this point.
Right.
And so I think Alec Burks ends up being huge to keep for them? And then maybe does it make more sense then if you assume that you, like, let's say you can't get an Augustine, you're not going to get a Dragic. Is there like something to then, well, if you can keep Alec Burks, it might just be like maybe we need to fill the roster with Kent Bazemore. It's just like guys who we know can shoot. And he can facilitate a little bit, but guys we know who can shoot rather than trying to focus on the functional ball handling aspect.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you about Alec Burks. You know, he was one of the only guys on the team. You just like need guys without a conscience who just like do not care and are willing to just fire away, because you know Ben is gonna find them. And like Tobias, I tweeted a clip early in the season where he catches a pass above the break. There's no one within 10 feet of him, and he didn't pull. He tried to like drive in and got called for an offensive foul. And I'm like, if Tobias is not taking this shot, the Sixers are so much more screwed than we realize. And little did I know how prophetic that would be. So, yeah, I would love to see Alec Burks. I have no idea what kind of market he would have. My other thought is like Austin Rivers has a minimum player option. Maybe he hangs out with his dad in Philly.
Maybe his dad's willing to give him more than Houston, just like his dad was willing to give him more as an executive with the Clippers than probably any other team on the face of this planet. Was that a 2016 contract too? I can't remember because it was 3 years. It was like $42 million. But look, Austin Rivers shot like 36% or something on pull-up threes this year, and like that's something the Sixers could. And look, they have room to have both him and Alec Burks on this roster. Quite frankly, neither of those guys solve your point guard issues, but it's like you said, it feels like they just need the guys who actually can shoot and then are going to be willing to shoot.
Right. Yeah. Just fill out your backcourt with actual playable bodies, because they did not have really anything resembling that once Ben went down.
So let's talk about this Tobias Harris, Al Horford stuff. We'll start with the quick question. Whose contract is worse right now? So Al Horford has 3 years and $81 million left, but only $69 million of which is guaranteed. Silver linings. Mm-hmm. Tobias Harris is on the books for 4 years and $147.3 million. So which contract do you think is harder to move?
I mean, I've been of the mindset that Al is harder to move, but I'm genuinely curious to get your take as well, because like it's, you know, Sixers Twitter I think has been overly optimistic about how easy it is to move either of these guys, and I think especially given the financial constraints of this summer where so few teams have cap space and there just aren't. It's like you're gonna almost have to trade a bad contract for a bad contract, but both of these guys are, I mean, they're two of the worst contracts in the NBA. The only reason I choose Al over Tobias is, one, from a fit perspective, I think you can talk yourself into, okay, if you move Tobias to the 4 full-time next to Joel, like we've seen that work in 2018, 2019, that look was pretty effective. I just don't see a way, unless Al Horford, you know, gets new knees, that he's going to be the fit between, it wasn't him and Embiid or him and Ben. It's all three of those guys together. I think they averaged, when they were on the court this year, I think it was 99.5 points per 100 possessions, which
that seems low.
Just, yeah, it's a little low, not ideal. And like defensively, they were great, but like I think Al Horford ultimately is best as a 5 on both ends of the court at this stage of his career. So I just think like Tobias, I know it's a bigger contract, but his age and like you could still talk yourself into, okay, he's not a great defender, but he can be like poor man's Carmelo. He'll give us, you know, low 20s and 7 rebounds a game, and that's fine. Al Horford, it's like, is this guy just totally washed? Like, what can he provide? Because, you know, that he had so many games this year where he just looked bad on both ends of the court. I think you're taking a bigger leap of faith if you're another team taking on Al Horford right now than you are Tobias Harris.
I'd agree with you mainly because of Tobias Harris's age. Like, he's only 28, and it feels like he's 38 because he's played for a zillion NBA teams. And maybe the teams that are going to be willing to take on that contract, they might actually be like better teams that feel like they're a third option away from being like a serious title contender. And he is more than fit to do that. Like, he was a legitimate like number 2 during that year that Gallo went off with the Clippers before he was traded to Philly. And so like he can still be good. He's just not I think after seeing him play in tandem with Jimmy Butler, like he's not the guy that's going to be that type of table setter or put the requisite pressure on the rim in crunch time to really diversify your offense. And if there's a team that doesn't need him to be that, where Philly so badly needs him to be that, I think it's easier to justify that contract. And the other thing with Al Horford is, if you told me, because you're looking at the partial guarantee in the final year, and it's like, well, then it's really only 2 years. Like, how do you pay someone $13 million to just not play for you? And so it almost feels like you're forced to guarantee that. Like, that partial guarantee is monstrous. It's $13.5 million, I think. So, like, that's just not something to get rid of. And so you almost are tying yourself to 3 years of it. And it's like you said, you worry about the injuries. If you could tell me he'd be healthy, I might pick Al Horford here. I might pick Tobias Harris's contract, and also losing the revenue is going to be tough. But like when you're looking at their salaries, I think right now that you can say, don't look at their price tags in general, because they're both seem, I'm pro players getting paid. Good for these guys getting all their money. But from a team perspective, they're making too much. I think you could say, though, that Tobias Harris is going to be worth $7 to $8 million more per year than Al Horford moving forward, which is what he's getting paid right now. And that's where I ultimately land on that. The problem is that I don't think you can view Tobias Harris's contract then as an asset. It's relative. It's an asset relative to like the lesser of two evils, which isn't much of a selling point for these. And so, do you think the Sixers are going to be looking to move one of them? Because I'm sure they'd be willing, but like, is this something they're actively going to look to do? And two, if they are, like, are they going to be willing to glitz up the offers with the necessary buffers? And I'm like, number 21 is fine, but like, are you willing to go further out with the first round picks you're giving up? Are you willing to include Thibault in this? Are you willing to include Shake Milton in this? How many is it like, and how many are you going to need? Because it feels like you're going to need two sweeteners at least to get off one of these deals. And if you're looking to get a player who can actually like help you, it might be three, because if the player coming back isn't on a bad contract, as you mentioned, then like that's like another hurdle that they have to clear.
Yeah. And I think if they're going to try to trade one, they would try to trade Horford first. I think that the Doc Tobias connection, I think they're probably curious to see if they can unlock him. And again, the age, as you mentioned. So I think Horford would be the guy, just because like ultimately you don't need to be spending $28 million or $27 million on a backup center, which is what Al Horford profiles as. Like, they can say he's a 4 and he can play next to Embiid all they want. It's just not true.
It's so annoying on the Sixers part, by the way, that we finally got to a point where everyone recognized Al Horford as a center, and then they signed him to be a power forward.
It's like, well, I want to play power forward. And they're like, great, here's $109 million to do that. It's like, no, he's a center. It's just he can't chase defensively. He can't chase fours. They tried to play him in drop coverage as a backup center. He couldn't do that either. It's like, and again, as you mentioned, the knees in particular give you some concern. So, like, I think they could pretty easily flip him. Not easily flip him, but if they were able to move him, I think they could get a replacement level big in his place for a lot less money, because like they signed him as in part, as they won't admit it, but part of it was Embiid insurance. Like, they got so rocked in that Raptors series whenever Embiid came off the court, they were like, okay, cool. Now we have Al Horford. So for 48 minutes a night, we're going to have one of these guys, like an all-star center in theory, on the court. We shouldn't get blown off. But they just ignored, like, we shouldn't be paying $28 million.
Yeah, it's like that's like great logic in theory, but not when it costs you $109 million. Yeah,
right. So like Sixers Twitter's favorite trade target is Buddy Hield, and Jason Jones of The Athletic just wrote a piece last night about him, because Buddy Hield has been feeding into this on Twitter. He's been like liking all these Philly posts.
His open disdain for the Kings, even during contract extension talks, was I love it.
Probably not a great sign. So like, do I think the Kings are willing to move off of Buddy Hield? Yes. Why would they be willing to move him for Al Horford? Like, what would you have to include? That's kind of
questions like, would they be willing to move Harrison Barnes for Al Horford? Like, forget Buddy Hield to me. I'm like, are they going to do Barnes for Horford without getting like two sweeteners in return?
Right. Right. Like that's the missing variable is how much do you have to include? Like I think the Sixers would gladly give up 21 or any combination of picks in this year's draft because they'll just treat it as like, well, they're not on our roster, so they aren't valuable. That's how they tend to value picks in recent years. Zaire Smith, I think, is like the wild card that they don't care about, and they just know it's not going to happen in Philly. I don't know how much, if any, trade value he has. I think he's probably just a lottery ticket at this point. I don't think he like moves the needle on a Buddy Hield deal. So I think they'll sniff around bigger names like that. Chris Paul was, of course, a possible target as well, but who knows with, I think his relationship with Doc probably nixes that. Although
wow, I totally forgot about that too. That's a good point.
Yeah, apparently they've like since been on good terms, so maybe not, and maybe they, but I don't know. That seems like if you're adding Chris Paul to an already volatile locker room situation, that just seems like a recipe for disaster. So I think they'll sniff around the bigger names. Andrew Wiggins would be another one where I could they'll place a call to Bob Myers and say, Andrew Wiggins, Al Horford, how much more do you want? Maybe Wiggins.
It's bad if Andrew Wiggins is the asset in that deal.
I know.
He has 3 years and $94.2 million left on his deal, I believe. I've clearly $94.7 million. Excuse me, it's even a little bit more than that. So, yeah, he has more guaranteed money on his contract, but I guess because he's younger and that makes him the asset in that deal. I don't know that. I think I'd probably like that trade equally. Not at all for either team.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, I landed on, I think they need to shoot a little lower, and rather than do a 1-for-1 swap, they need to, part of the problem with Horford is that just there aren't many teams that need a center at all, much less a 34-year-old being paid that much money. The one team I keep coming back to is New Orleans, not for Drew Holiday, because I just don't think I don't think there is enough that they could include to do a Horford for Drew Holiday. I think
off the top of my head, I would say Shake, Thibault, and a future first, not even this year's first, because I don't know why they would want number 21. I'm not even sure that's enough. And then would you give up all four of those things, like Thibault, Shake, this year's first, and then a 2022 first? Are you doing that for Drew to get off Horford's money and get Drew Holiday? I think I probably would, but that's an awful. You could probably talk yourself into, well, none of them are high level assets, but given how important Thibault and Shake Milton are, and how much you need cost controlled assets, that's a hell of a price to pay. I'd still probably do it though. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, but I still think the Pelicans, if they're shopping Drew, they can get more than that. I don't think
also fair.
Yeah, so I come back to more, rather than go for a bigger name, try to break Horford up into smaller pieces if you can. So one of the ideas I've kicked around is something like bring back JJ Redick, who was just on Matt Barnes' podcast and said they effed up by trading him, which fair. Darius Miller, who is coming off, I believe the Achilles didn't play at all last year. So it's kind of just I don't think the Pelicans are probably going to be that married to him.
Right.
And then Nico Melli for Horford and whatever, 21 and some combination of future picks, or some of the seconds that they have, or I don't know what that sweetener is, and ultimately that's where I keep coming back to with all of these Horford and Tobias trade ideas, because yes, if they could trade Al Horford for Buddy Hield straight up, go for it, totally. It's not going to happen, but go for it. But I keep wondering, as you said with the Drew stuff, are you trading so much that you aren't drastically improving either the short term or the long term outlook? And if so, I wouldn't make a Horford trade for Nicholas Batum just for cap relief, because cap relief isn't going to help the Sixers at all. They won't pay the luxury tax. I don't care. Bleed Josh Harris dry. Do not care at all.
That's what I was actually about to ask you, because it's would you do Al Horford and let's even say it's a smaller sweetener for Andre Drummond, from Cleveland, just to get off his money at the end of next year? And look, then Drummond's just backing up Joel Embiid and then getting the shit kicked out of him in practice by Joel Embiid too. But I mean, it makes sense, from a like just a far removed perspective, like that's now we're thinking about the team's finances, but it also doesn't really even matter because like that's not even really going to be the difference if you keep Josh Richardson. But even if you don't, like that may not even be the difference between unlocking the non-taxpayers mid-level down the line. So you're not really saddling yourself with any additional assets by making that move. You're just saving Josh Harris money.
Right, exactly. And I don't care about that at all. It's less money he can donate to to the Republican Party. So it's actually for the best. That's the only benefit to Al Horford's contract these days. So, I mean, that's ultimately where it lands is like, I'm okay with, of course they should be shopping these guys around and seeing what they can get, but I wouldn't want to give up a ton of assets, especially just for cap relief, if it's going to make you worse both next year. And then also, like, as bad as Al Horford was next to Embiid and Simmons, you pencil in 20 games probably that Embiid's going to miss. Horford does have a role there. In the 15 minutes that Embiid doesn't play per night during the regular season, like he and Ben coexisted somewhat well together. And, Horford had a down year shooting. I think if he, unlike everyone else who comes to Philly in recent years, like regresses positively to the mean and actually starts shooting better, especially on catch and shoots next year than he did this year. Like, I'm not saying he's going to provide the positive value on the contract, but it's not like he's a complete zero of a player. So, I think they do need to be careful. And ultimately, it would not surprise me if they run this back and, they say, last year going into the season, we were heavily projected to be a title contender. Now we've added someone, whoever with the mid-level, we've added these draft picks. All of these guys have another year under their belts. They have more chemistry together. We have a new coach. Let's see what happens. And then if it all goes to hell in those first few months, like that's what the trade deadline's for. Okay. We tried it. It didn't work. Then we can re-explore deals then. And, you've paid 4 months of Al Horford's contract. So maybe it's slightly more enticing, but I mean, I keep being fearful that it will be exiled from Sixers Twitter again for saying like, I wouldn't be shocked if they run it back, but I wouldn't. It's 1 year too late, but
it's tough I wouldn't be shocked either. And it's without knowing what the like market to like grease the wheels of a trade for Al Horford is just now more than ever, because his contract seems steeper in what we expect to be just a more constrained cap climate. And so like, I think he could help, the logistics aside, like I actually think he's a good fit in Sacramento, where you don't really know what's happening with Marvin Bagley, and he's just, what is he going to give you on defense? Richaun Holmes is good, still not a great defender, and then also Horford gives you range that Holmes doesn't have. Even Marvin Bagley like shot pretty well from the outside towards the end of his rookie year, but not proven either. So I like him there, but it's just a matter of like, what do you have to include to get a Buddy Hield or even a Harrison Barnes in that situation? The Pelicans were another team that sprung to mind. He's actually a great fit if he's healthy alongside Zion Williamson. But what do you have to, you're not getting any huge assets back in that deal. But again, what do you have to give up as the sweeteners there? And then the other team that kind of stood out for me, it would be like, if they can get assets for the future, but then it's also someone who helps them immediately, like what would it take to get Rudy Gay and Patty Mills from San Antonio? Like that, those two contracts fit perfectly into what Al Horford is owed. So like, what do you need to give up if the Spurs are willing to, if they are thinking more long-term, or even if they just want to go a little bit bigger up front, they don't want to pay Jakob Poeltl and they're intrigued by Aldridge Horford for a year with DeMar DeRozan. That would be like the most depressing 3-star core that we've seen in a long time. But like, what do you have to include to get that? That might be another avenue to consider, but I just don't know. Like we could say two sweeteners, like a pick and Matisse Thybulle, but like I don't even know if that's enough.
Right. And that's the problem. I think if Horford was on an expiring contract, it'd be a lot easier to conceptualize, because we kind of know the going rate for, you could get a first round pick for a guy on like a $15 million contract, like you rent $15 million of cap space and get a first round pick. But what do you do for $80 million of cap space spread over 3 years in a pandemic? I don't know. The only other one is like, if Boston really wants Al Horford back, maybe they got shook by Bam Adebayo. Do some variation of Horford for Gordon Hayward, plus, it's Boston and Philly, so they'll take at least like 3 picks from the Sixers and rake them over the coals for the third consecutive trade. But that's another one where it's like, if Boston was very desperate, I'll put it that way. But I don't see that happening at all. I think that's probably even less realistic than the proposed Buddy Hield, all of the Buddy Hield trade variations.
The other thing that I thought about is like, could they go for a smaller swing where it's like if you pair Zaire Smith and Mike Scott's contracts together with other assets, you could take back a $10.2, $10.3, $10.4 million player, whatever it is. If you could figure out a way to get a 3-for-1 done, if you threw technically Thibault into that equation, like you're looking at being able to get a player who makes almost $14 million back. Is that something that they could or should consider? Or is it at that point like, well, then they're obliterating their depth, but at the same time, it's like, well, how important is Mike Scott and Zaire Smith to what they're doing right now anyway? Like Thibault, I get, but if he's the asset that's getting you back, I don't even know what player it is. Like this might be a package that only gets you, if it's Scott and Smith and then something else, like maybe you can get Thomas Satoransky, which I think helps, but it's like, does that do it for you? Like, is that like, oh, cool, like that's a good move? If
it was like Scott, Smith, and 21, like bring on Derrick Rose, ready for those people.
Oh my God.
But no, I mean, I think that's absolutely worth exploring. I cannot express enough how bad Mike Scott was this past year. And again, I love him. I know Sixers Twitter loves him. He was probably their worst rotation player.
I've the room exception well spent. Then I'm like what? The logic there is just so bizarre. The last thing I wanted to ask you is just an open forum. What's the most undercovered aspect of this team, in your opinion, or what's just something that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think I don't know how covered this is from a national standpoint. I think Sixers Twitter does a fantastic job of this, but the front office is just still such an open question. We've been hearing nonstop leaks over the past few weeks about like big changes are coming, and Alex Rucker, one of the EVPs, is apparently going to lose his job, but he still hasn't actually lost his job.
Right, and the spin that like he was calling a lot of the shots like this past season, like that was weird. Like at that point, it's like, okay, like Elton Brand's agent is like doing some heavy lifting over there.
Yeah, like I think fundamentally they really screwed up in 2018 when Colangelo resigned. Like bringing in Elton Brand, who is apparently very well respected around the league, but like a first-time GM, very inexperienced. They kept all of Colangelo's cronies still on board, and these guys are the ones responsible for taking what they had in 2018, which was a very promising core with a lot of flexibility. And we are here right now where we're talking about like how much will you have to include to get off of one of these contracts. It seems kind of absurd to me that any of them are still employed. And by all indications, Elton Brand's going to keep his job. The rest of the front office is still up for evaluation. So
wasn't there talk of like an extension for Elton Brand recently or something? Am I imagining that I saw that rumor?
He wanted one. He approached Sixers management and wanted one.
I appreciate the boldness, the daring in that scenario.
Yeah. Right. Like I only saddled you with two of the worst 5 contracts in the NBA, but give me a 3-year extension and I could dig my way out of it. So yeah, I think just the overall, like what the hell is going on in the front office, again, very well covered locally. I think it probably deserves more attention nationally. Doris actually went in on it during Game 4 of the Sixers Celtics series, and everyone on Sixers Twitter was like, "Yes, Queen, thank you."
It's bad when Doris Burke is going in on live on national TV about it. Like I've heard her going on podcasts, but like when she goes in during broadcasts, it's like it's because you screwed up badly.
Yeah, like that badly. Yikes. So that's one, and the other is, as much as I love Embiid, his shot selection at times. I think that is one thing that Doc really needs to get on him about. It's not even, of course he's going to post up a ton, and he's one of the only guys who can actually post up well. He'll turn it over when he gets double teamed. He's got to improve there. but like he also has a couple shots per game where it's like early in the shot clock, and it's like he gets
Jamal
lazy.
Crawford's it.
Like, I was gonna say like Russell Westbrook. Like there's like 18 seconds left on the shot clock, and he like pulls up for a long two, and you're like, why? Like, what are you doing? If you just cut out the 3 or 4 worst shots from his diet every game and redistributed them to anyone else, I'd rather see Ben Simmons take 4 threes a game than Joel Embiid take some of these shots. So I think that is something to keep an eye on next year and see, how Doc distributes touches and shots, and like if he could get that cut out of Embiid's shot diet, because again, it's like it's the same thing with Russ, right? You take out the 5 worst shots he takes per game, and he's a totally different player. But because he takes those 5 shots a game, he is that polarizing. Embiid, I think, is so physically opposing and so dominant. Draymond has even said it. He's like, you're bailing defenses out every time you take a shot like that. So the Sixers really need to get on him and be just like make him watch that Draymond clip over and over again. It's like this is one of a 3-time champion, one of the best defenders in the last 5 years, telling you don't do this because you're bailing defenders out. Listen to him.
That's spectacular. His turnover rate on post-ups this year, I think, was sub 12%, and it actually felt like in real time when you're watching it that it was like much higher.
Yeah. Yeah. He has gotten better, I will say, every year in terms of his passing vision. And you can tell it. I mean, because he knows, like in the playoffs, he knows he's going to get double teamed on post-ups. And we saw it time and again in that Boston series. So it's a work in progress, but I think we have seen some incremental progress on that front. But yeah, I mean, that also is a major area of focus moving forward, at least, especially because, again, it goes back to the Ben Simmons question. If Ben Simmons isn't going to shoot, you got to figure out where to put him on the court that, they can't leave him wide open, because then like whoever is guarding Ben Simmons is going to double team Joel Embiid.
Bryan, thank you so much for coming on. This was a blast. If you guys are not following Bryan on Twitter, remedy that immediately. You can find him at btoporek. He is a quality editor for Bleacher Report, co-host of the NBA pod, and he writes for Forbes Sports and Fansided. Again, Bryan, thank you so much. It took too long to get you on here in the first place, but rest assured, if you're willing, I will be pestering you in the future.
Very good. Happy to come on when they trade Al Horford this offseason.